This video is talking about what are exception objects and how to handle exception in Java. An exception is an object in Java. The exception contains many information. When the exception happens, that means you have a method got some error, so that's why they threw an exception. When you run a program, an exception happens, your program will crash. But in the console, some information will display. From the point the exception being through, including the name and the stack checks, they will display in the console. In order to prevent your program will crash, you can handle the exception, so then your application can continue to run. So the first thing we see, what is exception in Java? Here is the exception hierarchy in Java. So you can see here we have the parent class called exception. Then you have the runtime exception inherited from the exception object. Most exceptions actually happen in the runtime, because only when your program is running, the exception will be through. The runtime exception including no such element exception, or illegal argument exception, arithmetic exception, no pointer exception. So this no pointer exception, sometimes you will see that's when you create or declare an object reference, but this object reference didn't refer to any object. So you try to access that to invoke any method, so the no pointer exception will happen. Arithmetic exception usually happen when you do the calculation. Sometimes maybe the number is too small or too big, so then the value cannot be held, so arithmetic exception being through. Illegal argument exception, that sometimes is your format for the number is not matched, so that's why they threw the exception. No such element exception, that's the next one we want to show you the example. Remember, when we try to get the user input, we create a scanner object in Java. So sometimes we expect user to enter an int. So then the scanner object, we will using the next int to save the value. However, if we expect user to enter integer, but user give us a double number, so that's your data type actually is mismatch. So your input mismatch exception will happen. So we have some example I want to show you here. So the first one, let's see what the input mismatch exception happen. So this one is earlier we talked about. Remember, we create a scanner object so we can read from the user input. So we can use the next int if we are expecting the next input value is int. If we do the next double, that means we expect the next input is a double number, same as the string. So here we see the example. So this one is exception demo.java file. You can find this source file under your demo file in module 9. So we see this example. We are expecting user to enter 3 int number because I create an int array. So that's why here we see I just expect user say please enter an integer for index from 0 to 3. Because I have the int array, of course I expect user to enter integer. So I use the next int to save the value. But we see what happened if we run the program. If the user didn't really enter the integer. Okay, so here is the example. So then you can see here if we run the program. Okay, so we enter 1, that's okay. But then if I enter negative 2.5, so then you will see they have the error happen and they give us the information one by one. So I go back to see the example, I show you the sample output. because here maybe it's too small. So in the handout, actually, I also copy and paste the result to show you. If you enter the number is correct, all that's integer number. So we finished the program, no problem, without an exception through. But if you give them the double number, we are expecting the integer number. So here you will see the information one by one. And this one is actually, we talk about the checks stack. On the stack checks, so they will give you the information. So you will see actually the last one they told you from exception demo.main file. So that's from your Java file, your main function you see in your line 15. So we go back to see where's the line 15. You see here is line 15. Line 15, we are expecting the next int. So that's why here we are expecting the integer, but user give us the double number. So it's from here, the exception through from the next int method. So here you see one by one, this one is where is your current program, the error happened. So that's why the static checks, they will show you one by one, go back to the beginning where they came from. You see this one came from the scan the next int. Also the next int actually they have a lot of information there. So then you see one by one, they will show you where this came from. So that's why here, did you remember in the beginning we told you, if you have an exception being through, some information about this exception, including the name, yeah, here we show you the name, actually is your mismatch data. So then the stack checks, that's the information we show you one by one. Like here on the output, you have that your exception happen is from the exception name. So that here, so here is your input mismatch exception name. But then from beginning to the end, actually they start from your main program. But your main program actually, because you call the next int method, so one by one they told you where the error came from. So sometimes your exception happen, that's the error happen. But if we can handle the exception, your program can still continue to run. Instead, we let them crash. So to handle the exception in Java, that will be the same as in C++. The same thing, we will use the try and the catch block. So you will using the try and catch block. So the try and catch block, the first part is the try block. In your try block, you including the statement that will possibly through the exception. So then in the catch block, they will catch the same data type exception. Then and they show the information how that exception happened or the exception name. So that's why we see the example from this one, from earlier our example, if we want to handle exception. So we know here, we know the exception happened came from line 15. So that's why we need to have a try block include this line. But sometimes, of course, you need to see what you need to do, right? Because suppose that you put a try statement here, but then we need to continue to do that. So sometimes you need to decide what else you want to put in the try block, but definitely need to be including that statement through the exception. So that's why here, when we implement the try block, that's the statement or the method will through the exception. So then if an exception will through, so if all other statement also will be skipped, we also include in the try block. So when you do the try block, then if that exception happen, right, so then we will catch that exception within the same data type. So what kind of exception there was through here, you need to using the same type to catch. So then you can display the information. So the try block just try to handle the exception happen. But of course, sometimes your exception not happen, right? If they are not happen, right, so then we just skip the catch block. But if the exception through, right, so then we will ignore all other statements after the exception happened. So then we just handle that exception to catch that. Okay, so we see the example. If we want to really handle this exception, you see if this input is mismatch, I really don't need to assign the value to the array. And also I cannot display the information. So on the other hand, actually the whole line 15 to 17, we can put that in the try block. So then afterward, we need to have the catch. So that's why you will see the example will become like this. Okay. So then we ask the user to enter an integer. So then we just see here is the next int. So then if the number is correct, we display that. Otherwise, actually, we need to catch that input mismatch exception. So here, earlier, because we're using the for loop. So now one thing is, remember, you still want to continue, right? So that's why here, this one we're using a do while loop. So this do while loop just when we have if that exception is not being through, so we know our value is correct. So that's why here we have a flag here. So this one is continue input equal to true. So then if we got the correct input, we just set equal to false. So that's why we don't have to go through this do while loop anymore. So we ask the user enter integer. So then we get the integer. So then if we can come to this point into the line 18, that's mean I don't have any exception happen. So then we can have this continue input equal to false. So otherwise, if the exception happen, I just catch this exception. So then we just let the user know actually what's wrong. So that's why we say try again. So you will have incorrect input. So then we can go back to our try block to ask the user again. So you can download this example. So that's why here you can see we ask the user to enter integer, but I enter the double number. So then we'll just continue until they do that. So make sure you need to download those demo from the demo file and run that program. Anytime when you watch the video, you can post that. So then download the program from our demo file and run from your side and to see if you have any question. If you have any question, write it down. So then when we do our Zoom meeting, I will answer your question. But now you need to try to write it down your question. You can either post in the discussion or we will go over that in our Zoom meeting on Wednesday.